At the upper left area, there is a keyboard, the color of it is white, and there are hands which parallel with each other, which is right. At the lower left area, there is a hand which parallels with the keyboard, and it is the right gesture. At the upper right area, there are two hands which are twisted against each other, and it is wrong. The second picture in the right area, two hands are the point in the opposite direction, which are wrong. The third picture at the right area, there is a hand forming an angle with the keyboard. At the lower right area, there is a hand whose wrist forming a right angle. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about the height of trees. The items include hemlock, cedar, spruce, Douglas fir. According to this graph, in hemlock, the value of height is around 130 feet, and that of cedar is higher, which is around 200 feet. You can see from this graph that the highest value of height is in Douglas fir, which is around 280 feet. In conclusion, Douglas fir has the highest number. The following picture gives information about the core. According to the picture, we can see from the inside to the outside, there is an inner core, which is 800 miles, 1,300 kilometers. Following that, it's the outer core, which is 1,400 miles, 2,250 kilometers. And then it's the mantle, which is 1,800 miles, 2,900 kilometers. The most outside one is the crust, which is 5 to 25 miles, 8 to 40 kilometers. In conclusion, the core has a very complex structure. The following graph gives information about global warming predictions. Light color represents low temperature increase and dark color represents high temperature increase. From the map, we can see that the highest temperature increase can be found in North America, which is 6 to 8 degrees. Following that, the second highest temperature increase can be found in Africa and Europe, which is around 3 to 5 degrees. And the lowest temperature increase can be found in Australia and North America, which is around 1 to 3 degrees. In conclusion, the world is going to have global warming as predicted. The following graph gives information about simple circuit with light. This is a very beautiful picture, and it shows a number of things. According to this graph, at the central area, there is a battery, the color of it is black and yellow. You can see from this graph that, at the left area, there is a bulb, the color of it is white. You can see from this graph that, there is a line connecting the bulb and the battery. The electricity flows from the negative pole to the positive pole. In conclusion, this picture is very informative. The following graph gives information about electricity generation in China by type from 1994 to 2004. For the conventional thermal, it has increased from 600 in 1994 to 1500 in 2004 gradually. When we look at the hydroelectric, it remained relatively stable, at around 100 throughout the period. For the total generation, it has increased dramatically from 900 to 2000 from 1994 to 2004. To sum up, conventional thermal still occupies the largest part of electricity generation in China. The following graph gives information about a modern suspension bridge. Firstly, we can see that the bridge is built with natural materials which make it blend with the natural environment. According to this graph, the bridge is made of thin wooden boards connected by steel suspension rods and cables. Last but not least, if we move towards the background, we can find that the bridge is located in what appears to be a forest or nature reserve. In conclusion, the picture may be taken in some national park or somewhere similar. The following graph gives information about the housing structure. When we enter the house from the entrance, on the left-hand side we can see a small kitchen, with a stove in it, and on the right-hand side there is a small toilet, and a place for a shower. Going deeper into the house, we can find the main bedroom, which is on the left corner, with a double bed, and a desk in it, and the living room is on the right corner with spacious room, a long lounge, and some sofas. In conclusion, it is a very comfortable house to live in. The following graph gives information about proportion of languages. The items include Latin, French, Germanic languages, derived from proper names and so on. According to this graph, the proportion of Latin is around 29%, and that of Germanic languages is lower, which is around 26%. You can see from this graph that the highest proportion are Latin and French, which are around 29%. You can also see from this graph that the lowest proportion is derived from proper names, which is around 4%. In conclusion, Latin and French have the highest proportion of languages. The following graph gives information about world population development from 1750 to 2050 in developing and industrialized countries. From the graph we can see that the population in developing countries has remained stable in 1 billion from 1750 to 1900. After that it witnessed a dramatic increase to 10 billion until 2050. However, for industrialized countries, it remained at a relatively low level throughout the years, which is around 1 billion. In conclusion, while developing countries have undergone a sharp population increase, the population in industrialized countries has seen little change. The following graph gives information about life expectancy at birth by sex. The items include years, males, and females. The horizontal axis is the year, ranging from 1888 to 2013. According to this graph, in 1888, the value of males is around 45, and that of the females is higher, which is around 50. According to this graph, the highest value of males is 75, which is in 2013. According to this graph, the lowest value of females is around 50, which is in 1888. In conclusion, the female has the highest life expectancy at birth. The following graph gives information about air temperature. Data of different areas are displayed on the map. According to this graph, the highest temperature areas are in African and South America. In comparison, the lowest temperature areas are in the Arctic and the South Pole. You can see from this graph that the moderate temperature areas are in China and Europe. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about the percentages of an unknown metric across 4 countries from 1995 to 2010. This is a line graph showing trends for Sweden, France, Denmark, and Germany over the years. According to this graph, Denmark had the highest percentage in 1995, with a significant decline, reaching the lowest value of around 10% by 2010. You can see from this graph that Germany also experienced a sharp drop, reaching its lowest point at 5% in 2007, followed by a slight increase in 2010. Sweden and France show relatively stable trends, with Sweden maintaining around 27% after 2004, and France hovering between 23% and 24% during the same period. In conclusion, this graph shows a downward trend for all countries, though Sweden and France exhibit more stability compared to Denmark and Germany. The following graph gives information about the percentage of hotel revenues by class. The items include upper upscale, luxury, and the other. According to this graph, the proportion of upper upscale is around 75%, and that of luxury is lower, which is around 22%. You can see from this graph that the highest proportion is upper upscale, which is around 75%. You can also see from this graph that the lowest proportion is the other, which is around 3%. In conclusion, upper upscale has the highest percentage of hotel revenues. The following graph gives information about how houseflies work, that is, the life cycle of a fly. It starts with eggs which are laid by an adult fly, and then the eggs become first larva stage. In this stage, the larva is relatively small. Then the cycle goes to the second larval stage, where the larva grows larger, but the color remains relatively constant. When it comes to the third larva stage, the larva becomes much larger and the color starts to become darker. After that, the cycle reaches the pupa stage where the larva is covered with dark skin. The pupa becomes an adult fly eventually, which can lay eggs again, and let the process continues. In conclusion, this image gives a vivid illustration of the life cycle of a fly. The following graph gives information about two examples of input process output. It shows how the process is done. The steps include materials, factory, and product. According to this graph, the first step is input materials. According to this graph, the second step is to go to the factory. You can see from this graph that the third step is to become the product, which is the output. You can also see from this graph that the next step is data is the input. According to this graph, the next step is to go to the computer. According to this graph, the next step is to become the information, which is the output. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about the percentage of students proficient in a foreign language in different countries, including China, India, and Russia, categorized by males and females. India has the highest percentage of both male and female students proficient in a foreign language, at 56% and 69% respectively. In contrast, China has the lowest percentage of both female and male students proficient in a foreign language, at 33% and 15% respectively. In Thailand, the percentages of male and female students proficient in a foreign language are 30% and 27% respectively. In conclusion, this graph provides interesting information. The following graph gives information about how an apple seed can become an apple tree. It shows how the process is done. The steps include apple seeds, an apple tree, a flower, and so on. According to this graph, the first step is apple seeds. According to this graph, the second step is to sprout. You can see from this graph that the third step is the apple tree. Then the next step is the flower. Finally, we can get green and big apples from the apple tree. In conclusion, the process will repeat. The following graph gives information about supply chain management. It shows how the process is done. The steps include raw materials, components and manufacturer. According to this graph, the fifth step is to collect raw materials and turn them to components with machine. Followed by that, the second step is to send components to the manufacturer and make products of them there. You can see from this graph that the third step is to send products to the retailer. The final step is to sell products to consumers. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about water wheels with different rotational directions. On the left, we can see a water wheel, which is rotating anticlockwise. On the right, we can see another water wheel, which is rotating clockwise. According to this graph, the water wheels are both overshot ones, with a flume overhead, through which water flows down on the wheels. And we can see tail races lying below the water wheels, in which water falling down from the wheels flow away. In conclusion, the graph is informative. The following graph gives information about the proportion of electricity generation across Australia. The items include coal, natural gas, bioenergy and so on. According to this graph, the proportion of coal is around 73%, and that of natural gas is lower, which is around 13%. You can see from this graph that the highest proportion is coal, which is around 73%. You can also see from this graph that the lowest proportion is the bioenergy, which is around 1%. In conclusion, coal has the highest proportion of electricity generation across Australia. The following graph gives information about teaching as a career. The items include final year student who wants to be a teacher, graduate students working in teaching, employed in the teaching field. According to this graph, the value of final year students who want to be a teacher is around 1%. And the value of graduate students working in teaching is around 7%, which is higher. You can see from this graph that the highest value is in employed in the teaching field, which is around 95%. You can also see from this graph that the lowest value is in final year students who want to be a teacher, which is around 1%. In conclusion, employed in the teaching field has the highest teaching as a career. The graph shows a different part of the tree. When we look at the top of the picture, we can see the crown of the tree, which includes leaves on top, a twig in the middle, and branches at the bottom in the crown. Followed by the crown we can see a trunk, which connects the roots in the soil. Finally, the crown of the tree shares a similar size with roots so that they provide a lot of information to scientists. In conclusion, this picture demonstrates the structure of trees. The graph gives information about how to use a plastic bottle as a bird feeder. According to the picture, it is clear that on the first stage, there is a water bottle with two pencils in it, which is brown and blue, respectively, and the bottle is full of food. After that, on the second stage, the two pencils are replaced with two spoons, which are made of wood. In conclusion, the little bird standing on the spoon can get food from the bottle, and we can see the caps of two bottles have different colors, namely blue and white. The following graph gives information about bird migration in the continent of America. In this graph, Canada is marked as a breeding area in blue, and the north of South America is marked as a wintering area in orange. According to this graph, birds will fly northwards in the spring from the wintering area to the breeding area, as the yellow arrow shows. And birds will come back in the fall to the wintering area, as the green arrow shows. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about pencil length. The items include New Jersey, Chicago, and Michigan. According to this graph, in Chicago, the length of the pencil is around 46.750. And that of New Jersey is higher, which is around 50.680. You can see from this graph that the highest length of the pencil is in New Jersey, which is 50.680. You can also see from this graph that the lowest length of the pencil is Virginia, which is around 18.950. In conclusion, New Jersey has the highest length of the pencil. This graph shows the government expenditure in different sectors of education. It is shown on the graph that $11 billion are invested in education in total. At the top of the pyramid, we can see higher education, in which $1.8 billion are invested, followed by which vocational educational training and schools get $2 billion and $3.4 billion respectively. At the bottom of the pyramid, we can see the early childhood, in which 80 cents $1.4 billion are invested. It can be seen that schools get the highest investment, while early childhood gets the least. In conclusion, this graph gives very interesting information. The following line chart gives information of how to define overweight. According to the chart, the green area means underweight, with height more than 1.56 meters, and weight less than 12 stones. We can see the blue area is healthy weight, with weight less than 16 stones. We can also see the pink area is overweight, with bigger ratio of weight over height than healthy weight. Then we can see the yellow area is obese and the red area is extreme obese. Finally, extreme obese has the biggest ratio of weight over height, with height less than 5 feet and 6 inches and weight more than 74 kilograms. In conclusion, this chart is very informative. The following graph gives information about adding an article to Wikipedia. It shows how the process is done. The steps include searching Wikipedia, thinking of another term, creating a new article. According to this graph, the first step is searching for Wikipedia. According to this graph, in the second stage, there are 2 questions. The first question is it found? And if the answer is yes, it goes to think of another term. If the answer is no, it goes to the second question, is there a related term? And if the answer is yes, it goes to create a redirect. If it is no, it goes to create a new article. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about the beginning of the flow chart for the quiz. It shows how the process is done. The steps include clicking to start the quiz, clicking to go to the next question, and click True. According to this graph, the first step is to click to start the quiz. Followed by that, the second step is to go to question 1. You can see from this graph that the third step is to click False or True. You can also see from this graph that the next step is to click to the next question. The final step is to go to question 2. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.